while lifting up their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. Also Jehoash, Bani, Shebiah, Jamin, Hakub, Sabathiah, Hadiko, Maisha, Kelita, Azariah, Josabad, Hanan, and Pelaiah, and the Levites helped the people to understand the law, and the people stood in their place. So they read distinctively from the book in the law of God, and they gave the sense and helped them to understand the reading. And Nehemiah, who was the governor, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn nor weep." For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, "Go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared, for this day is holy to our Lord. Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." So the Levites quieted all the people, saying, "Be still, for the day is holy, do not be grieved." And all the people went their way to eat and drink, to send portions, and rejoice greatly, because they understood the words that were declared to them. Now on the second day, the heads of the fathers' houses of all the people, with the priests and Levites, were gathered to Ezra the scribe, in order to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month, and that they should announce and proclaim in all their cities in Jerusalem, saying, "Go out to the mountains and bring olive branches, branches of oil trees, myrtle branches, palm branches, and branches of leafy trees to make booths, as it is written." Then the people went out and brought them and made themselves booths, each one on the roof of his house, or in the courtyards, or in the courts of the house of God, and in the open square of the water gate, and in the open square of the gate of Ephraim. So the whole assembly of those who had returned from the captivity made booths and sat under the booths, for since the days of Joshua the son of Nun until that day the children of Israel had not done so, and there was very great gladness. Also day by day, from the first day until the last day, he read from the book of the law, and they kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day there was a sacred assembly according to the prescribed manner. Kind of lengthy reading. This lesson starts here. You know, last week we finished the wall in our lesson. Then that was chapter 6. Chapter 7 is basically a genealogy of the people that returned. And we see that there was quite a crowd there, and as it says in the first verse or so, and you know the way I teach, by the way, you know I pretty much don't follow the book too good. I'd sort of just break it down, and that's kind of what I'm going to do, is sort of go by verse type thing on it. But the assembly of this was it says it's first day of the 7th month of the Jewish calendar. Well, that's during our September and October. And he says that this assembly was in front of the water gate, and there was a large crowd. And these people, if you follow back through through chapter 7, verse 66, we know that there was at least 42,360 people. So obviously that gathering was big. I mean, you know, it was a lot of Jews. So this was not just a haphazard thing either. It had to be well planned, because one, we know they had built a podium there for the reader. We also know that he had to do all this to facilitate that. So he was probably the one that was in charge. And it was primarily, he had called them there to do a census, more or less. And that was the reason there that they were there. And these Jews here, you got to realize, they have come out of captivity. They've been in Babylonian captivity how long? 70 years. Then they were with the Persians, some. But they were allowed to leave and go back, and some did the first, and then some came later. So you think about it. We have here a generation of Jews that don't know their laws. Because they've been in Babylonian captivity. And we know Nebuchadnezzar, per the scriptures, did not allow them to worship. So they had not had any exposure or didn't really know their Jewish faith because they had been in captivity. So I think like this, this is a history. And what we see transpiring here is we've got them now. We've been through Esther and we've been through Solomon's deals and all the way to here. And now then they've got back. So we're looking back at what they did at that time to re-educate them. Well, the first thing that they had to do was get the temple rebuilt. So we've studied where they got back now and got the temple rebuilt. Well, there's not anybody living there particularly. And now you understand that when they came back to the land of Judah. They didn't come to the city of Jerusalem to live necessarily. So they're scattered abroad in there. Well, even then, when they get back. And 40,000 people, even if all of them came back, they're scattered around. So he had to call them in to the city. They got the temple built. So this is Nehemiah. He's saying, okay, we've got the temple, we've got my walls built. Now we need to teach these people what they're supposed to be doing because they don't even know. They've lost a lot of their Jewish heritage, and obviously the priest had not been allowed to teach it. So we have a time here now that they've got to be assembled. So, and what is unique also in this study, if you recall, we've studied about Solomon building the temple. You recall when we was going through that book of Solomon and all about that, and the Kings, and we talked about the dedication of the temple. You remember that? This coincides at the same time on the Jewish calendar. This day he starts it on the Jewish calendar. Today is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. This month of Tishri, which is sort of like our September, October. And on that day, they were supposed to have a feast on that day. And that feast would be the Feast of Trumpets. You can read about it in Leviticus 23. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any labor, but shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. This is the New Year's Day on their calendar. And he's getting this all ready. This is, in this, we don't really have mention here necessarily of blowing trumpets, but that's what this day was supposed to be. And if you're going to have a big gathering and you want to teach the people the law, what do you need? You got to bring out your best preacher, right? I mean, you got to bring out your male futural. You got to get him there so he can quote these scriptures out and read this stuff. So this is the first time in the book of Nehemiah we see the word Ezra. Now, has Ezra been there the whole time? I don't know that I think so, because I believe he would have already been teaching, because he is a priest and he was the high priest, and that would be what a high priest would do to make his paycheck. He would be preaching. So I don't believe Ezra was there. I believe possibly, well, this is not my opinion necessarily, but about 3 other books I studied, or 4, did somewhat agree that he had probably been called back to Persia to help with something there, because we had Esther, and Mordecai. There were some interactions, I believe, between Ezra and Mordecai. So he may have been back there in Persia with something there, and Nehemiah summons him to come, because Nehemiah is the one that's got this whole thing laid out. He's the one that's planned it. He's The governor, he's got all of this. So I think, he's probably sent word, Ezra, you're the high priest. You need to come and help teach these guys the old law. And I believe that's the format or the background of where we are. And another thing here is Ezra has spent all of his time teaching the law, because being a high priest, there could have not have been a better guy to get there. And obviously Nehemiah, he would have known the law, but yet he didn't feel like he was in a position to do it. So what was read? It says he read the law. What is that? First 5 chapters of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. I believe that's what he read. We all know that wasn't happening in one day. And it says here they read from basically morning to lunch. So let's say they read 6 hours. It would take a lot of 6 hours to read that, and especially to read those 5 books in a way that it could be understood. That, it's something that they hadn't read. And what you could look at the book, was it legal stuff, was it priestly stuff? But, look at how the word is explained or described in those first verses. The reading is referred to as a book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given Israel. That's in verse 1. It's called the law in verse 2 and verse 9. Verse 3, it's called the book of the law. It's called the book in 5 and 8. And the law of God in verse 8. The law of the Lord had commanded through Moses in verse 14. That which is written in verse 15. And the book of the law of God in verse 18. A book which contains the ordinances in 18. So the law was read, and the Jews accepted it as the law that was given by the Lord to Israel through Moses, preserved in writing on scrolls, a divine law that the Israelites were obligated to follow. Okay, you remember in Solomon's dedication, they read from the law, and then what did Solomon do? Y'all remember? Before they dedicated, as they were dedicating it, and before he burnt all those 300,000 animals, just about, what they did, he prayed. So what do we do? What happens here? Ezra prays. And he begins that prayer in verse 6. And the people rose to their feet. Now then, this gets to be a little bit of a conjecture. They stood when they started to read. Then people take off. Did they read? Did they stand the whole time? Did they stand this 6 hours? I don't know that if I was reading scripture reading today from the pulpit and I was going to read 5 verses, would we all stand up for me to read 5 verses? I believe we'd probably all get to our feet for 5 verses. But if I was going to read for 6 hours, I don't believe it'd be a whole lot of us standing at the end of 6 hours. I believe they probably stood for a while, sat in a while, but I think it more or less generally means they stayed in the same place. Maybe they sat in the same place, but I just don't believe that and besides that, I don't know how much merit that would surely cause me as far as my faith in the scriptures if they were standing or sitting. I think the main point is they were listening because they had been there, and you read, what were all these guys on this platform doing? Don't you think they probably helped him do the reading? I mean, after reading an hour or so, I would think your throat would get sore, and you might call on another person to read some of it. And I believe that's the reason there was all these men up on the platform, was to share in the reading of this thing. And what is the law written in? What language? Hebrew, right? Where have these people been for a long time now? Babylon? What language are they probably speaking? Aramaic. So they probably didn't halfway understand it. So Ezra, and if we read, they were people wandering around, they had to have some translation going on. Because these guys, and today, in the country of Yemen, the Jews there follow the Aramaic version of the old law. They don't use it. So the old law here, Ezra would have been reading, would have most likely been in Hebrew. Some of them may have been out there actually translating it as it went. But there was a learning gap right there of not only not being exposed to this material, but also because of a language barrier. So that's to me, is some of the divine workings of God in this picture right here, is to do a service that he could work with all of them. And you understand, we read a little further there, that when they heard this, they were immediately shocked, they wept, they mourned, they were repentant. So this right here, we have this opportunity to see what the power of the Word is it not? It brought people to their knees, as it says there, they all dropped to their knees and everything at the reading. They were convicted of their sins. And then they're told not to take this as a day of mourning. And in that part, I think the reason he wanted it to turn obviously to a day of rejoicing. Again, we know it is a day that they're supposed to be blowing trumpets and all of that and everything. But Ezra and them wanted them to see the graciousness of God's forgiving. Because if they read the Pentateuch, you know they had to read some of those verses where the Israelites, which would have been the history of their people, had went astray. God had forgiven them. God had accepted them back. So that's the part of this story that Ezra and them want them to understand. Is this same God, who is a just God, he does render punishment to those that are obedient. However, there's always a path to forgiveness. And I think that was the part that Ezra and them wanted to understand, that yes, y'all, we as a people have done wrong. We haven't done that. But yet there is a way back. And then we noticed that the reading didn't end on the first day. It continued on the second day and up into the observation of the Feast of the Tabernacles, which we read about. Now then, when was the Feast of the Tabernacles? Y'all recall, because I happen to have that was the one that I taught there. It was to be held 7 days from the 15th day of the 7th month. So most likely from the 1st to about the 15th, because we in this same chapter here, we read where they're told to go out and get some sticks and all live in booths or in little homemade camps that we made when we were 12 years old, like boys did. So there's a period of the 1st to the 15th, that's 2 weeks, that they've been there most likely studying and all of that. And you think about that in this. Do you think there was a reason that Nehemiah told them to come the first day of the month of Tishri, Tishri? Was there a reason why he picked that particular day? Well, we could say, well, maybe he knows that Solomon did it basically the same time. Possibly, right? Or is it because every Jewish holiday is in the month, 7th month just about, except Pentecost and, I don't know, I can't, just like that, left my mind. But we have the Day of Atonement's coming this month, in that same month. And then you have the Feast of the 8 Days, which is at the end of these 7 days. So the Jews are just holidaying all through the month. So I think that's probably the reason why, too, that it was picked. Because all of these religious holidays of theirs fall within this 30-day period, right? But I feel like, that was the reason. The reading of the law didn't end the first day. And that feast was held 7 days. And Solomon, like I said, dedicated that day. All right. Here's the particular time and reason I feel it. Tishri is our October 3 to November 1. These are this year's what the Jews should be doing if you're a devout Jew. And there's not many of those. Tishri, October 3rd to November 1st. All right. The Jewish New Year's is Rosh Hashanah. That's on day 2 to 4. And again, their days are, from in the afternoons to the next day afternoon. The Feast of the Trumpets was one day. That would be October 3rd this year. The Day of Atonement is one day. That would be October 12th this year. The Feast of the Tabernacles is October 17th through the 23rd. And then the celebration of the 8th day is the 24th. So you see, Nehemiah and Ezra knew all of this stuff. These people had not observed these days. So don't you think it's probably reasonable that he called this meeting to take this time also to re-educate the people on their, let's say, what they call their high holy days. And the first Israelites, it says in verse 17, and this is a little bit of cause for conjecture, and some people have a problem with it. All right. The first Israelites kept the Feast of the Booths, or called Feast of the Tabernacle, because they were delivered from Egypt. These people here, they could celebrate being released from Egypt and Babylon, so they had even more reason. And here it says that the entire assembly of those returning lived in booths and branches for 7 full days. Then the writer says, this has not happened since the days of Joshua, son of Nun. And oh Lord, that's where everybody, all these Bible critics, oh no. Man, he missed it here. They did this in Solomon's time, and Zerubbabel did it, right? So do we have a discrepancy here? They goofed up. I would venture to say what they mean is this is a question, not a statement. They have not done this joyful since the days of Joshua. Doesn't that seem more like what he's probably trying to tell them? This has never been celebrated with such enjoyment, satisfaction since Joshua's, because the other Feast of the Tabernacle and all of these other things, these people may have not have been through it. These guys have just been through similar situations that the children of Israel did when they left Egypt. So, and when Joshua had the first feast, and they had to live in it, in the booths. So I feel like that this time right here would be probably the second most joyful time for this feast in Jewish history. That's, if you read in 2 Chronicles 7, that's where Solomon observes the feast, and Zerubbabel did it in Ezra 3. Now then we read verses 18. Per the reading, Ezra read from the book of the law daily for the duration of the feast. And then on the 8th day, that's the day of full celebration at the end of the Feast of the Tabernacles. What kind of feast it was probably just like a big potluck lunch, right? We have, right? But it's 40,000 people at the potluck. So, we have in great detail what Solomon did at the dedication of the temple. We don't have this massive slaughter of animals here, or it's not detailed. So we know these people have just returned, though. So we know they probably don't have the animals or that much to really sacrifice as they did in Solomon's time. And we know that in their time, they had been in captivity. It doesn't say that they got to bring all their animals back. And you remember in one of the prior lessons that they talked about how long it would have took to walk from captivity to Jerusalem. It was months, remember? So we know they weren't able to bring a lot of provisions with them and what they had to do to get ready to leave. So these people haven't been here long enough to establish homes, farms, and do all this kind of stuff. So when you look at this lesson and you read this, what's the takeaway for us? I mean, are we just sitting here learning history? I mean, we're taking a course in Jewish history at this particular time. We were studying about how somebody went in and renovated the city and built the temple back, and they laid the walls to, as David says, half the height. Is that what this is all about? It's just a history lesson? What is in it for me and you in 2024? I believe a few things that I just took note of here. We should honor His Word by recognizing that it's God's inspired Word, which He brings out in verse 1 and 8 and 18. B, I think we should honor it by reading it often. That's what it says in verse 18. And not only read it, we should seek to understand His Word. That's in verse 7, 8, and 13. And then the Word should, if we've read it and we understand it, it will obviously do the next step. It'll convict us of our sins and our shortcomings. But it'll also give us the comfort that's available through the knowledge of God's gracious forgiveness. And that's in verse 9, 10, and 12. And then what does that leave us with? Verse 13. We got to obey it. As David prayed in Psalms 119:12, "Blessed art thou, O Lord. Teach me thy statutes." I think we should pray as David prayed. And as Paul said in 2 Timothy 2, verse 7, "Consider what I say, and the Lord will give thee understanding in all things." So I think we need to pray, and prayer will help us with our understanding. We should think on God's Word, like the psalmist said in Psalms 1, verse 1. "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in His law doth he meditate day and night." Have any of us spent that kind of time studying? Have you? Have I? I will say this, that when I teach in here, I find myself studying a whole lot. And you know what? It makes you want to study more. I mean, I taught Wednesday night, then that one was short notice. So, and I hadn't prepared like I normally do for this one, because I've always tried to, that's the reason I've had to walk back up there and read. Usually I have it mostly memorized when I get here. But that makes you want to study more. Getting prepared for these lessons has helped me more, I'm sure, than it's helped y'all. I mean, I try to make this thing, the book does not challenge me too much, to say that. So I try to get a lot more out of those verses that's there, and the meaning and the concept and the situations. And I find myself learning a little bit, and then I just keep digging and digging and digging and digging, and that's what leads into all of this other stuff. But that's what studying the Word does. It makes you want to do it more, and it's just eats you up. You just got to know. And I've been told that I have to teach the Wednesday night of the 28th or something, because you got to teach this Wednesday night, right? You teach this Wednesday night, because Mel's going to be gone, and I think I've got the last one. So, I've already sort of got in my mind something that I've really been wanting to talk about, or not what I want to talk about, what I wanted to study. So if I'm going to study it, y'all going to hear about it. It's been my opportunities, right? So I've got this subject in mind, so I'm really getting sort of ready to start studying for that lesson the last Wednesday night of this month, But in this stuff, what we're talking about, we've learned this stuff, we've studied, we've prayed. Now what we got to do? We've obeying it. We got to practice it, right? What does James 1:22-25 say? Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only. And then even Matthew 7:21-23 in the Sermon on the Mount. Not everyone who saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. So we have an obligation where these Israelites were just learning the law. You and I are to learn it, know it, obey it, live it, and share it. Sometimes I wonder if we sort of failed short of that last one a little bit. Maybe the situation hadn't come up just right, and I'm convicting myself of the same thing I'm telling you. I believe that there's anything in the brotherhood that we've got to work on right now is Christianity's in the wings in this country. It seems like it's flying away. We as Christians, we have an obligation to stand up, to share His Word. And we got to share the Word as it's demonstrated here by Ezra. And we read in the reading, the fellow Israelites, how they wandered among the crowds, as we read in here, helping one another understand. We have an obligation to spread it. We have an obligation to help one another and teach one another, just as these Levites were teaching their fellow Israelites the law. We have an obligation as Christians to share. And I believe if we're going to get our ultimate reward, that's what we've got to do. We can't be pew warmers, biblical scholars, or prayer warriors, all of these words. We got to be doers of the Word. And I believe sometimes that's where we fail in our life as Christians. I appreciate your time. There's a lady in the back who has a hand raised. She wants to share some wise words of wisdom with us. It's my wife. Verse 10.
And where it tells us we're going to eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. So, what is that about?
Well, obviously, if you recall, this may have been one of the Sundays that you laid out, ma'am, but if you recall, this is a Jewish Jewish neighborhood. You remember? Yeah? Shake his head. Y'all remember that from the last couple of weeks. I mean, I know you may have been asleep like me half the time, but still. All right, we know that these Jews are businessmen. Remember we studied about that? And some of them had bought all of them's cows, all of them's houses, even bought their kids and made slaves out of them. So we know there's a group of these Jews that has just been chewed out in the chapter or two before. that they've taken all the money from their buddies and their other fellow Jews, and you got to redistribute some of that, guys. Y'all done racked up. You've got the Jews that own the department stores like Pizitz and all those were, and then you've got the Jews that's down there cleaning the bathrooms. So what I'm thinking has happened here, there are a certain sect of the Jews that had. So there's a certain bunch of them that didn't have, obviously. So he's telling in those verses to take, hey, you that's got a bunch of stuff, feed the ones that, I've just told y'all last week to let them go free again, and you gave them their house back, but they ain't got nothing to eat yet. So I think that's what he's telling them here is, hey, look, share the fat, give them some of the sweet wine, So he's admonishing them to look back and take care of those that are at this time haven't been restored to the normal Jewish prosperity that they seem to all enjoy in Solomon's time. But I believe that's what he has there. Anything else? Doug?
I'm curious about how they kept track of the days. Would it be you and I have a personal account?
Well, I'm sure there was a calendar. Yeah, I'm sure there was a calendar. Because, thousands of years before, they had all of these, they found these calendars on these cuneiform stones, and all that. So I'm sure they, obviously, in the Jews, when the sun went down today, that was yesterday, in their minds or something. That's where they kept it. And then they had their calendar, but it was more or less a solar type calendar too,
What I'm specifically curious about is when they left Babylon, they couldn't take everything in the kitchen sink.
No.
So I just wonder if Nehemiah, how he pulled that off. Hey, this
Well, yeah, and how they knew the day, and how you got that many people to walk that far, that many months, and what they lived in, and like you said, and what they couldn't have carried nothing much with them. I mean, and it's so just for this many people that we just read about here to be there, or it was in chapter 7. You see, there was such a crowd of folks. It would be a caravan coming. It's kind of like what they say when how they describe the population of China. Yeah, I know I'm not the only one who's heard this, but you say you can line the Chinese people up in a line and start marching them in the ocean, and the line to get longer. That's how many of them there are, and how fast they make another Chinese. But that's the reason they've cut back on birth control, or on having children. But this would have been a massive undertaking just to get them back. Then you got a massive undertaking here. And by the way, this is the first time we hear of the word, one of the first times we ever hear of it. They had a Watergate hotel here, didn't it? It said it's in front of the Watergate. So, we had a Watergate here. But no, I enjoyed the class. I enjoy y'all being here. Thanks for everything y'all bring to the class. And I hope to some extent you got something out of this few minutes together. Thank you.